Good evening. I would like to extend a warm welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for your interest in our event, Designing Architectural Research. I am Maria Perbellini, Dean of the School of Architecture and Design, and I am delighted on behalf of New York Tech and our school to welcome an outstanding group of guests who will be engaged with a discussion infused by a virtual exhibition curated by Director and Associate Professor Pablo Lorenzo-Eiroa and Professor Tom Verebes. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce in this occasion our new post-professional Master of Science in Architecture programs with specializations in computational technologies and in health and design. The 2 degrees just went live on our school website this afternoon. They are listing our graduate options, and they are in information and with more details available for our students and interested friends. These 2 Master of Science programs were part of a competitive grant proposal supported by the IDC Foundation based on the ambition to evolve towards a renovated excellence, embracing a re-energized and entrepreneurial direction with innovative curricula promoting unique and collaborative educational experiences. I want to take this opportunity to renovate our immense gratitude to the IDC Foundation for trusting and embracing our vision. The IDC Foundation's generosity and inspiring partnership have been crucial in supporting our transformative learning environments and initiatives. With this grant, we have been awarded more than $2 million for funding the 2 Master of Science programs that we are presenting today, a state-of-the-art digital technologies and fabrication lab, inclusive of robotics and updated equipment, and additionally, the first IDC Foundation Endowed Chair in Computational Technologies, the first Endowed Chair at NYIT, increasing opportunities for funding faculty and students' research, enhancing our reputation and presence, and acting as a catalyst for growth and distinction. With those 2 Master of Science new programs, we are focusing on fluid and agile degree plans and on a more integrated and shared knowledge with the promotion of cross-pollination scenarios by breaking fields and expertise boundaries. I see the urgency to encourage the collision of disciplines for a greater impact on significant issues. This critical moment for our agencies is an opportunity to build collaborative practices. The COVID pandemic, climate change, social justice are all related issues and all simultaneously in front of us. I would argue that these challenges exceed the abilities of any one discipline, which means that experts from diverse fields must work together to provide a range of problem-solving perspectives. And please join me in welcoming our co-curators, Pablo Lorenzo-Eiroa and Tom Verebes. As Pablo and Tom outlined the intent of this event when they presented to me the idea of this virtual exhibition. And by the way, we have an amazing group of participants tonight, and I want to welcome all of you for being here with us. I have to say that it always gives me a pure joy and a great pleasure to be able to facilitate and support faculty initiatives and aspirations. It is a great privilege for me to work with smart, intelligent, and really people that had a vision for our school and help me in actually enabling the vision for our school. Pablo and Tom will introduce our guests and will share with us a few more details on today's virtual exhibition, moderated questions directed to a small group of exhibitors, followed by an open discussion. And please allow me, in conclusion, to say a super special thank you to the lecture series and event committee. Please, Tom, Pablo, they are all yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with all of you. The backstory to this, of course, is that we've been working to launch 2 new MS programs, which we will do in September. So I'd like to say that, well, this exhibition and this event is one of the moments where we'll celebrate the launch of our 2 new MS programs. So I'd like to thank all the exhibitors for your contributions to this virtual exhibition and to the participants joining us today, and I'll introduce you sort of one by one in a moment. Thank you very much to Pablo for working together to make this exhibition happen and this event. And of course, we're grateful for the support and the initiative of Dean Perbellini. Let me introduce the people who are here. There are 24 exhibitors in this exhibition. Many of you are here with us in the category of Computational Technologies from Ecologic Studio, Claudia Pasquero, Marco Poletto, and Irini Tsamoko. From Future Forms, we have Nathalie Tagueño. Jason Kelly-Johnson couldn't join us. IJP Architects, Georges Legendre is joining us. And from the Institute of Computational Design in Stuttgart, Nicolo D'Ambrosia is here to join us. From the Material Topology Lab at Technion University, we have Karen Lee Bar-Sinai, Tom Shaked, and Aaron Sprecher. Rob Stewart-Smith is joining us, Sumin Ham, Patrick Schumacher, and in the category of the exhibition, Health and Design, we have Robert Adams, Iman Ansari, Benaz Farahi, Bess Kreitmeyer, and Nicolo Casas and Anouk Woodbrecht. It's a lot of people. And there are several who couldn't make it of the 24 practices that we've curated. So to reiterate from the Dean that the exhibition does mark the launch of our 2 new MS programs, which collectively aim to create at once an immersive as well as a transformative postgraduate research environment at NYIT as the 3rd postgraduate MS program in our school. And this environment is intended to be one where knowledge can be advanced and innovation achieved. Regarding the one half of this exhibition that I will briefly introduce, the category of health and design, and Pablo will introduce the computational technologies part of the show in a moment. So over the last half century, a heightened consciousness has emerged and taken root within the design disciplines, making paramount the ecological well-being of our designed environments, our urbanism, our architecture and interior spaces, and also of the health and wellness of people, of society, and of our planet really as a whole. So the alternatives to the prevailing approaches in healthcare design is the area of research which will seek to work out and find and to shape. And we'll do this through the experimentation with new, augmented, and intelligent systems, material science, media, and the design of environments and spaces, and apparatus and prototypes. The new form of speculative interdisciplinary design practice that we're pursuing may empower a more positive impact upon our bodies and our minds by exploring the latent potentials at the boundaries of the discipline of architecture and the medical and health professions across a previously untapped range of global health concerns and the intersection with design. As an approach to these objectives, our postgrad health and design program will explore potential applications of emerging technologies with the intention of bravely addressing design challenges rather than focusing on solving problems through tried and tested formulations. Experimenting at the forefront of the disciplinary connections brought together in healthcare design, the goal of which is to apply new approaches in designing the qualities of spaces for treatment, convalescence, and recovery. And the ultimate goal of this MS program is to focus its teaching and research towards propositions of new spatial, material, and medical prototypes, and to chart new areas of advanced architectural research at the intersection of health and design. So Pablo, if you'd like to introduce the computational technologies part of the show and the MS program briefly, and then we'll get to our some structured questions with our guests.
Well, thank you, Tom, and thank you first, Maria PERBELLINI, our dean. I would like to congratulate you again for the IDC grant. I think it's an amazing opportunity for New York Institute of Technology and for the emergence of the School of Architecture and Design in the New York area as a leader in terms of not only architecture theory and history, but also in terms of technology, which is the strength of New York Tech. I also like to thank you for trusting us in the development of these programs and for the sets of events that we are organizing in that respect. I also want to really especially thank Tom Verebes. It was great to work with you and through the development of the programs, the authorizations and all that. It was quite a challenge and a very nice working with you. So just briefly, because I want to jump into perhaps the questions to the moderators, because it's the exciting part, but I wanted to briefly introduce to you what is the program about. The program is named MS in Architecture, Computational Technologies. One of the main issues to me that started emerging the last 10 years since one of the conferences that we did at the Cooper Union, which was entitled Life Information for Acadia, is the relevance of history and theory in terms of computation, but also in terms of fabrication. And there is an interesting problem in the relationship between what happened in the 90s relative to the digital, what happens in the 2000s relative to fabrication and making that digital kind of utopia possible, and what happens since 2010 with big data, artificial intelligence, and all the things that are emerging now. To me, history and theory need to have a certain claim back in terms of architecture, computation, robotics, and technology, so on. And this program is going to especially focus all the way from the beginning. For instance, from new survey systems, which is an aspect of architecture that has been lost. In that sense, the MS in Computational Technologies is going to focus on new computational paradigms, new robotic paradigms, focusing on interactivity and fabrication. In that sense, the program will explore new relationships between technology and culture, perhaps taking a perspective from what's happening in the digital humanities. Ecology, of course, is going to be a departing subject across the entire program, redefining architecture as a space environment. The repercussions of an emerging architecture of information imply, at least from my point of view, that computational systems are themselves proto-architectural. And this is, to me, the key for our program. Our program is going to aim at expanding the typical design authorship in architecture relative to computational systems by learning, analyzing, and ultimately creating, and this is a big ambition of the program, new computational, robotic, and material systems. For us, these systems are parameters that may open up new possibilities for architecture. In that sense, we will address disruptive cultural innovation, aiming at design developing new technologies. This is a one-year-long program and includes 3 concentration areas, which are going to be the main core through electives and so on, and studios, which is going to be computational design, robotics, which includes robotic interactivity and robotic fabrication, as well as robotic automation in computational design, fabrication, and materials. Several types of robotic systems we're going to look at, spanning all the way from machine learning to artificial intelligence, but also looking at alternative computational systems such as simulation and, for instance, blockchain. We will lose one of the advantages, I think, of the School of Architecture and Design of New York Institute of Technology is the fact that it has 2 campuses in the New York area. It's not so well known. It's a very interesting strategy. And we're going to base the program in New York City, in Manhattan, in Columbus Circle, but we're also going to use the Long Island campus, which is very close by, only 1 hour away, to expand and build upon the new lab that Maria mentioned, thanks to the IDC Foundation funding, but also to be able to build the kind of prototypes and large-scale constructions that perhaps New York City doesn't have the capacity to service. So in that sense, perhaps this is just a fast introduction to the program. If you're interested in knowing more about the program, the website is now live. Thank you, Maria, for all the advancement and the revisions. It took a lot of work and effort, but finally we're here. So I want to thank all the team and the School of Architecture for allowing us to make this happen, and we look forward to the discussion. So perhaps now Tom goes back again and we start directly the questions to our participants. Thanks again also to all the participants, amazing set of participants, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Pablo. Maybe just a little word on the format. Of course, our participants are aware of the format. We haven't shared that with the audience. There's quite a flattening of the audience and the participants here in our Zoom world. We'll ask 4 structured questions. We have a lot of people joining us representing their practices in this virtual exhibition. Maybe, Pablo, would it be possible that we were meant to play the exhibition file in the background?
I thought that Susan is doing that or not? Because I don't have the...
Okay, we'll work that out. Okay.
No, we didn't discuss that. Sorry.
No. Okay. So we both have that locally, but on our computers, and we can play that.
Do you want me to do it now? If I can share.
Sure. And so I'll describe maybe the format. So we have a lot of people joining us from all of your wonderful practices, and it would be a little bit too unstructured just to sort of put questions out there and let it be a free for all. So we thought to ask specific questions to smaller groups of people. We have 4 questions that we've prepared quite carefully, and given time permits, we'll then open it up to a kind of broader discussion and maybe a bit more chaotic discussion, and also welcoming questions from our big audience here. So as a first question, which we'd like to ask to Robert Adams, Georges Legendre, Claudia Pasquero, Marco Paletto, Irina Tsomoko. So please, if you're not on this first list, bear with us. We have more questions and we'll be directing them to everybody. So the first question entails the shifts in paradigm that were constantly occurring at different speeds and different times, and the kind of spatial affects that our disciplines pursue. Many of architecture's leading protagonists have argued that architecture necessitates crises, perhaps even a continual state of crisis for its mode of operation. Challenging times and events and eras most often lead to ensuing innovations arising through expedience and ultimately to shifts in the discipline's guiding paradigms. Given the ongoing global context of COVID-19 as a sort of public health crisis, we may anticipate new forms of consciousness in society and urban culture regarding the impact of designed environments on our well-being, to develop our capacity design for the criteria of behavior of our senses, sensations, and our cognition beyond the visual. So please, can you share with us your views on possible consequences for emerging speculative and interdisciplinary design practice to be based on scientific evidence and computational rigor, and ultimately with greater capacities to simulate the qualities of architectural spaces and to better approximate their performative effects and affects. Can you speculate, please, and share with us your beliefs on the potential legacies of this crisis and its possible positive influence upon multidisciplinary design research? So if we direct this towards Robert Adams, Georges Legendre, Claudia Pesquero, Marco Poletto, and Irina Tsomoko. Are we here with us?
Shall we get going? I mean,
yeah,
since we are next to you in the virtual chessboard, well, our virtual chessboard, yes. So maybe we can take it as a suggestion and kick off. And so, well, first of all, thank you for having us. It's you know, obviously a pleasure to see everyone together in this screen, and also to feel closer. Thanks to this virtual exhibition and this chat we are having tonight. You know, here in London it's almost midnight, so we are probably not as sharp as we could be. But you know, definitely the topic you are touching is very close to us and our work. In a sense, we have been reflecting for several years now in terms of the repercussions of what we may call the linear metabolism that essentially still refers to how cities today functions, and how the so-called urban sphere, the global infrastructure that sustains our contemporary civilization works. And in a sense, for us, it's quite obvious that there is a correlation between the current health crisis and the repercussion of this linear metabolism. So the fact that, let's say, the tendrils of the infrastructure that supply food and energy to our cities, as well as the one that dispose of the waste, now reach pretty much every corner of the globe, and in that sense transport with them many and multiple kind of ecosystems, including viral ecosystems, which are now proliferating in our cities. So for us, there is a clear correlation there, and that obviously has encouraged us to work in this direction. And one of the elements that perhaps becomes interesting here is the way the definition of the concept of nature itself is somehow pushed to the limits, no? And in that sense, the so-called the green paradigm, or the idea, the notion of regreening cities as a kind of opportunity to, oh, something is happening here. Ah, okay. This exhibition is going. Okay, cool. Yeah. And so, you know, in that sense, I think that the opportunity to essentially redefine our concept of nature, and perhaps expand it across scales and domains becomes now obvious and crucial. So, in that sense, the understanding of viral ecologies as a manifestation of nature, as well as the pollutants and the polluted ecosystems that we produce, or that our civilization produce, are another manifestation of nature. And now all these manifestations effectively are now interacting to define the context for the practice of architecture and urban design today. I think becomes crucial. So in that sense, I see, or we see, the convergence of the discipline of architecture with ecology on one side and digital technologies, computation on the other side, as critical to be able to somehow bring to the surface, or bring within the reach of our perception these multiple dimensions and domains of nature, and therefore of architecture as well.
Yeah, in a way, to use, just to conclude, to use architecture and visual languages as a form of meta-language to create alliances with form of non-human intelligence. Somehow the response that we had until now to the virus is still the one we had to pandemic crisis 100 years ago, but could be rather different. It could be more about mapping information, creating new form of knowledge, as well as relationship and alliances with new form of organism. That is all for now. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Claudia and Marco. Robert, do you have, can you unmute yourself and
yeah. Hi, everybody. This is Robert Adams. Thanks for the good question, Tom. And I like the comments that were just made by Claudia. Maybe just to put some things into context, at least from my perspective. So I work in disability studies and architecture. I'm primarily interested in the process, and any number of processes that have to do with making, unmaking, and remaking. So right now, outside, it's this amber sunlight, and it's really amber tonight because of the fires in the west. I hope Natalie and Jason and the West Coasters are doing okay. But there is something I think very palpable in the air. The country, the United States, is both literally and figuratively on fire. And so I'd like to maybe just address some real gaps between what we're talking about in terms of our discipline and architecture and sort of discourses that travel that discipline, and then what's happening out in the world. So from an economic perspective, like the health and wellness economy is a $4.2 trillion, pile of money. And within that, less than 1% is accounted for like health and wellness in the workplace. And we know that, that especially right now with COVID, but prior to COVID and part of things, that are emanating and perpetuated by architecture and other disciplines around systemic racism, we know that the workplace is increasingly a toxic environment. And so the question that, Tom raised around like affective structures, affective spaces, and how space and architecture might become more responsive is something that I'm really trying to care for in the work. So just relative to thinking about like the gap between biometric sensing. So everyone has a smartwatch and it's measuring things like heart rate, number of steps you've taken in the day, et cetera. And then environmental sensing, which is driving, building envelopes and climates within the building themselves. Right now, there's a huge gap between those two things. So I think what we're going to see is that there'll be increasing demand for a much more responsive architecture that's tunable to human occupation and also machine occupations in terms of how do we develop microclimates and sort of microclimates within the building technologically, but also I think socially and culturally. So just some initial comments to riff on some of your good points, Tom, and your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. Is Georges Legendre, are you online? I didn't see you because I would be really interested in your take on the increase of scientific evidence as a basis to model reality and to shape reality through computational rigor. Maybe it's very late in London where George is based, so maybe he's not with us yet or at all. The goal of our two programs, which are of course slightly different goals, but both share the potential of being able to simulate a relationship to what it is we call reality, and that may have very different kind of conditions in terms of simulation of affective environments for the benefit of our well-being, or of more to do with the simulation of material properties or material effects, or just of algorithmic kinds of experiments. So maybe since George isn't here, Pablo, should we move on to the next question? Do you want to take the next question?
Yeah, sure. So the second question is on the relationship between culture, technology, and design, and it's addressed, I'm not sure if they're all here, I saw some faces. It's addressed to Patrick Schumacher, Bess Fietmeyer, Karen Lee Barsinai, Tom Sharek, and Aaron Sprechter. So computational technologies have become, over the last decades, the main reference to the cultural advancement of architecture. Computational power has increased beyond a human level with big data, machine learning, and AI. While architecture has historically been a cultural discipline enabled by the possibilities of technologies of representation and construction, today it seems that the relationship between architecture as a cultural discipline has been referencing and indexing technological actualization, placing the cultural project in the possibilities enabled by these new technologies. In a way, changing, if you want, a cultural project that is based on revolutions for a project that is based on progressive infinite growth. Having these issues being raised in other disciplines such as digital humanities, which presents emergent cultural questions that disruptive innovation often takes through technology, right? The question is the following: what are the new possible relationships that you see between technology and culture, or should we disregard totally that difference? If the common response is that through design, one is able to address a cultural project, the problem here is that computation determines the ranges of possibilities for a project. So in that sense, design through computation is a different kind of design, as we are seeing in a different type of reactive projects, such as the post-computation and new emergent cultural-based projects that are negating computation. What are the possibilities of architecture is the question in concrete to contribute to the advancement, perhaps even of new technologies. So if anybody else, Patrick, if you're there, or Aaron's team.
Patrick, if he's in, but I'm not sure if he's in. Okay. Well, I can definitely address that question. Pablo, thank you very much for the invitation. For us, it's really an honor to join you, on the occasion of the opening of such a provocative program at your school. I think it will be absolutely fantastic and an opportunity for all of us to also collaborate with you. I think that, in many ways, what you're referring to is our own experience that we have developed in the past years over here in Israel, because it's actually very much related to the history of our lab. When Tom, Karen Lee, and myself thought about the development of our lab, that is a research and teaching lab at the Technion Institute of Technology, for us the question was very much how could we make a connection between the global culture of digital technologies with the local culture of craft, of manufacturing over here in our region. And in many ways, I think that also is expressing or reflecting what we are experiencing today, also with the pandemics. That is, this sort of blurring condition between a global and a local condition. So what happened to us was really asking the fact that all of us around here and in the world are using pretty much the same tools. And yet I think that we need to stress and find a way to differentiate our use of those tools with our own cultures. And to do that, we needed to find a way to bridge between, those digital tools that are in a way very generic and the specificity of the local cultures. So what we basically decided to do was to bridge, what you would call the humanities, in this case, knowledge in anthropology and sociology, with a different kind of knowledge that is the one that is more technological and digital. So, Tom, if you want to, you can actually give an example about, what would be such experiment. But in general, what it means that we are trying to challenge the fact that the way we would be using, for instance, robots in our lab would be different than the way our colleagues in Germany or in Switzerland would be using it. and that in fact that specificity comes from the idea and the fact that we are collaborating and we are working within our local culture, a culture of material, a culture of methods of fabrication, and therefore that would allow us, all of us as a community, to create our own identities and specificities within that field or emerging field that today we call digital humanities. Tom, maybe if you want to join, give an example, or Karen Lee.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you, Maria and Tom and Pablo. It's so exciting to be part of this and to hear and to be part of your new program. To extend upon what Aaron just began and what we see actually as our, in a way, our journey. I would like to refer to what we presented, here. In a way, what we're trying to say is that in the time where remote is not only that which is geographically far, but also that is the proximate, which is rendered inaccessible, turning to our soil, to our local culture is in a way, is an imperative. We have to learn what our forefathers, first societies have mastered, to come and really see how we can transform our environment with a new degree of sensitivity. That respects it on the one hand, but also finds a way to construct from it. So what we present is the application of robotic tools to a desert site, to a very extreme remote site, and essentially the reconstitution of that material into architectural structures, learning and drawing upon historical knowledge, historical building techniques, and trying to find ways to reestablish them using 3D printing with sand and soil.
That's great. Thank you. Bess, do you want to say anything? Thank you, guys. Very clear. And I'm trying to follow now with the slides here so that people can relate the project that they are discussing.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. And really great questions, great comments. You know, this question of the cultural project, I think is an interesting one, and one where, yes, we're certainly tapping into local ecologies, local cultures, and exploring how those can define different ways of generating space and designing space. You know, my focus has been on kind of environmental building systems, and then kind of starting at that systems level and scaling up and trying to understand how that impacts larger architectural implications, questions, appearance. And I think one of the, you know, gaps, someone had mentioned like a gap that we're starting to address, is this question of how do we really incorporate you know, the local values, the local culture in the development of some of these systems. And whereas they're typically designed as according to very universal standards, right? So here we're kind of going between the sort of computation and the health question, where sort of typically when we're developing advanced technologies, you know, the kind of acceptance of users maybe gets asked a little bit later in the process. So as far as the sort of architectural process, the kind of cultural process is one which I think should, and we're doing it, I think we can do better, which really embraces diversity, embraces equity, and explores ways, and in my case, I'm working with a lot of different tools and actually big interdisciplinary teams, looking at ways where we can really incorporate that sort of end user feedback really early on in the design process and let that sort of play out. And it's going to be very different depending on building program, site, you know, all kinds of factors, right? Climate. So that I think is very, it's important for us to embrace, but also at the same time understand where that kind of design agency is located as well. Because a lot of that is falling, in many ways, can fall into sort of the end user in exciting ways.
Thank you, Wes. And also, to me, it's interesting that you are, I mean, both at Technion University Research Topology Lab and Wes here, you're engaging in developing technologies as means of addressing new possibilities for architecture. So to me, it's an amazing set of work. So with us, I mean, I don't know if Tom, you want to say anything, but you know, these questions are perhaps open up other type of discussions. And what's interesting, I think, to me, in the ranges of the different projects that we selected for this exhibition is that all of them, one way or another, they address these issues. So they're not just using the latest technology. That's, to me, one of the biggest critiques of the perhaps what's happening all over the world, that the schools of architecture are producing the same type of architecture because the systems are the same, right? So I think that is the beginning of the recognition that we need to move away from the homogenization and standardization of architecture in the terms of the tools that we're using. So Tom, I don't know if you want to comment anything, or we jump directly to your next question.
Well, I could do both in a sense of, I mean, the last question asks about the advancement of technology and the relationships of technology to culture. And I would think that in a more experimental sense of design technologies, the making of specific design worlds and kind of disciplinary areas of work has happened not just through computation, but very much through what we broadly use the term prototyping. And as a next question, maybe I'll jump into that. A third question, which will address to Sumin Ham, Iman Ansari, Nico Casas, and Anouk Wipprecht, and Benaz Farahi. So one of the commonalities of the two new MS programs that we're launching in Computational Technologies and Health and Design is that they both focus their, they intend to focus their teaching and research towards the propositions of new spatial and material prototypes in parallel, in that sense, in a more generalized sense, but yet intending for quite different agendas and outcomes in the Computational Technologies program, perhaps on a more larger prototypical spatial scale, and in terms of health and design, perhaps on an application of medical prototypes and apparatus, and possibly a kind of more interior design or furnishing scale. And so over the last 2 decades or so, material prototyping in the design disciplines has quite fundamentally and radically renovated what we can say is research or research-based forms of practice or research-based design. And as a question to pose to yourselves, in which ways can you foresee architecture's migration into new and unfamiliar orientations, applications, and disciplinary areas of the material research that comes out of prototyping tools and their methods? So we'll direct this to Sumin, Iman, Nicola Casas, Anouk, and Benaz.
Thank you very much, Tom. Maybe I can start. I think, yeah, thank you for the really sharp question. I think prototyping with materials has been a very efficient way for us to understand how material works, and that has been like really proved for a couple of years now, that we really the ways we research really prove that these ways of researching these materials and prototyping has been very efficient to understand, for us to understand how different kinds of materials can evolve into different structural kind of accumulations. And I think this is really important because the reason my work has been developed kind of like, very fortunately, I have been working quite a lot with the materials and craftsmanship for a number of years. But this has been a really kind of a ways to kind of question what our digital fabrication methodology has and research has been very much towards the robotics or CNC machines or laser cutters and 3D printers, and all these have been really focused on the ways to really simplify the ways to use materials, and that has been some kind of limitations and really goes against the way material wants to accumulate themselves or adjacent to each other. And I think this is really important, that how we understand how material is actually naturally working. So I think prototyping in a way that is really important. And it's really, it's very obvious that the mechanics and technologies are going to be evolving, and it's not going to be limited with simple robot arms, as we are kind of researching, have been researched for a number of years. So I think it's really important that we also understand the limitations of hardwares, and kind of really evolve from what's just out there, and try to more speculate on the technological development, not only from software point of view, but from also hardware point of view, and really down to structures. The material qualities and material behaviors are really important. That's why a lot of things that we prototype is a very efficient ways of understanding it. And that, well, it's another discussion, but I think also really interesting, also very important thing is that a lot of things that still computers cannot really make decisions, and there has to be a lot of humanism or human-made decisions, or like sometimes maybe aesthetic decisions needs to play in the role of making this framework. So I think it's a very important time of year that we kind of really consider about the human role within the design and prototyping or researching process.
Thank you, Sue. I mean, the leading edge, let's say, or the cutting edge, if one wants to put it that way, of disciplinary work on prototyping has, on one level, has involved, say, the hacking of how those technologies actually function to be able to make them do what it is we want them to do, or to do other things than what they're made for. And I think our disciplines are really quite adept at being able to hack the hardware and the software. I think the question is also addressed at what sorts of new formulations, new kinds of products, new sorts of disciplinary areas get formed. And we've formulated this question in a sense with the sorts of unplaceable design products, maybe that Benaz and Nicolo and Anouk and Iman that you're doing in terms of the contributions to the exhibition. Some of these products they're at once a piece of fashion as much as a kind of armature or protection. They're as much an interface as they are maybe a piece of kind of object design. At a larger scale, it might lead towards furnishing or interiors. So there's a sort of slippage between, and maybe if I don't know, maybe Benaz, if you want to jump in at this moment, the hacking of the disciplinary areas and the breaking of these kind of siloed boundaries, and your work does seem to suggest that there are incredibly fresh areas of research to be worked on through prototyping and through kind of material production that escape simple categorization.
Yes, thank you, Tom, for having us. It's great, and it's very nice to see everyone in this digital world. Also, thank you for the good question. I really think that I don't know. I had an interesting journey myself. Trained as an architect, I went to received my PhD in the cinema school at USC, and then now I'm teaching in the design department. So it's really sort of kind of like going through one discipline to another, and really trained as an architect. I think now the discipline of architecture is really opening up to so many different disciplines, and that the boundaries between disciplines are so porous, and partly is because of the importance of digital fabrication, digital design, and this has become sort of an urgent need in many disciplines, from fashion to industrial design to product design. To many different disciplines, there is this sort of urgent need to sort of look at a new way of material production. And I think perhaps as Manuel de Landa would like to say, architects are really good with materials, and they're somehow trained as material philosophers through their training on learning how to work and understand material properties, material behaviors, and so on. So, but I understand that this, you all had a sort of very structured questions for us, but I also would like to use this opportunity to break the structure a little and say that usually like natural science, it look at explaining things in nature as a separate silo of things. And then social sciences is look at explaining peoples or society, how society works. I think it's really an interesting era in which we can actually combine these two. So material research doesn't need to be separate from addressing larger social or political or cultural issues. And we can actually use material research to bringing back to addressing larger human related issues. I really enjoyed some of the comments early on about the importance of what we are experiencing right now in terms of social injustice, and how we can actually not just look at like, yes, production of new novel materials using robotic fabrication, novel emerging sensory technologies, but also in order to address larger cultural, social issues. So yeah, that's my take.
I think I would say that architecture has been maybe traditionally been viewed as an application of science and technology, and that perhaps the work we do and the technologies or methods that we're experimenting with recently can a little bit open that up and challenge that conception. And I think the value, going back to the discussion of prototyping, I mean, the value of prototyping or using technologies we have today, to me, is not so much as to what they bring or how they enable us to do the things we were already doing, maybe better or faster. But I think in the way they change really what we produce. I mean, historically that has been the case. From even, let's say, the use of graph paper by Duran in 19th century to the copy machine and Paul Rudolph's use of that in drawing, to the CATIA software and Frank Gehry's use of it. I think in all of these cases, it wasn't that, let's say, architects used the technology and just improved what they were doing, but that technology, the tool, and the methods and techniques associated with it fundamentally changed how architects work, and through that, it redefined architecture itself. And I think that's the part that I would say I'm most excited or interested about the era we live in today. There was a lot of discussion about culture and its relation to technology. Quite honestly, I don't even know how to define culture. It's very difficult it's hard to argue technology is not culture. So I think in that sense, Heidegger famously argues that we usually see technique, say in our case architecture, as a product of science or scientific speculations, but there are instances where that technique becomes an instrument or tool to produce science. And I think now we have an opportunity to do just that, and in a way, not just to use the tools or the techniques as a way to do what we've been doing, but to use it as a way to produce new knowledge and redefine what architecture could mean. I mean, right now we're just sitting from across the world in a shared virtual space. If this is not architecture, I mean, I don't know what architecture is. So in that sense, that requires not just a rethinking or redefinition of what we constitute as space, as architecture, but to go back to the human body, it also involves redefining ourselves as human beings. What constitutes us? What makes us human? And to me, challenging the physical, material, the stable kind of permanent conditions that architecture has so long assumed as a basis is a good first start for that.
I think one of the preconditions of new knowledge is that it's new. And what I'm finding so interesting is hearing your responses to a question which I thought would have such predictable responses. And so in some sense, this is also the production of new knowledge. If we could shift to maybe Anouk and Nicolo, and your contribution to this exhibition as a joint project is a wearable, a kind of highly augmented wearable, and it'd be interesting to hear your take on the question of kind of how our design disciplines are helping to shape and migrate towards new and unfamiliar orientations and applications of material fabrication technologies.
Anouk, you can start.
Okay, cool. Hey everybody, thank you so much for the invite. So yeah, what we have, it's actually an older project. It's from 2011, if I'm correct, Nicolo. It is the smoke dress. So it is a dress based on sensors, and the more people are around this dress, the more it starts to smoke. So it really plays with the notion of almost putting a smoke screen up. It is an older work from me, and it had already 7 iterations before. It was my graduation project in 2004. So that's like 16 years ago. So, and in between I started with like a system with dry ice and a drip system, and it started to smoke, was not ideal, into a really big smoke machine on the back of the design. So you turned around and it was not super sexy, into yeah, the smoke dress that I had in 2010. In 2011, I got the opportunity to work with Volkswagen for a show. And that was also the time that I've been looking into 3D printing, into more architectural design. So I call myself from fashion couture into, when I was 14 years old, I started that. When I was 17 years old, I got into robotics and electronics and interaction design. And then through Nicolo and through like my friends in architecture, I got into architecture. But the interesting thing regarding to prototyping, we're talking about prototyping and all of that stuff. We all, in all these disciplines, you have your mock-ups. In fashion, you have your trials. In yeah, electronics, you have your first setup, sort of your mock-ups, and in architecture as well. So there's an interesting thing that I always noticed, that this process is, the disciplines are also different, but the process is all a little bit the same, sort of. So in 2012, 2011, 2012, I had the opportunity to work on this project, and I started to know Nicolo. We became friends, and I invited Nicolo in order to make a new version with me of this dress, in where we really took the architecture to a next level, created space in the hips in order for the smoke to be pushed into the design, turn around and come out, sort of. So that is what you see here, and Nicolo can also tell a little bit more about the architecture of that. But yeah, in this project, the design was almost like a shell. We use TPU, thermoplastic polyurethane in the front, and this design was almost like a shell around the body, but still hosting this notion of housing the smoke in a sort of nice way.
Okay, I will shift slightly the question and the conversation to the importance of multidisciplinarity and for architects, and the importance of language and communication. And I was reading the description of your 2 new master programs, and I found it, first of all, very interesting, the fact that you are launching a pair of programs that complete each other, and I guess they're gonna also interact and interchange in some way. And there were some terms that I really loved, like innovation, technology, health, that are relevant to contemporary issues. And at a certain point, you talk in the description of the second program, the health-oriented one, you talk about physical and spiritual welfare of people and society. And I would probably add also intellectual, cultural, and ethic welfare, because it's 2020, so we have been facing ecological, pandemical, and social injustice now problems. And to me, there are like 2 ways to address those problems. One is to create and to work on projects that are facing directly the problems. The other way is actually to raise awareness among people and communities, so that we can start creating a culture and an ethic, an ecological ethic and a social ethic. And I think that as architects, we have been using technologies since the late 90s in a really exciting way, producing new aesthetics, new physical artifacts, new buildings, a new way to build and assemble as well. But at the same time, within our disciplines, I think that we also create a sort of gap between us and the communities. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why I started working multidisciplinary with couture, with fashion tech, but also with automotive and artificial intelligence and narrative modeling platforms and so on. Because to me, it is really, really important that at a certain point we redefine our disciplines in a more open, interactive, and a multidisciplinary way. And so we need also to change and adapt our language in the moment you are starting talking and exchanging ideas with a non-architectural audience and non-architect collaborators. And I think that this is important because in the same way, you can also start talking and have a language to communicate with local communities, and again, to raise awareness and to make intellectual, cultural, and ethic impact within the communities. And I think that this, and I'm glad that you are launching 2 new masters, is a really interesting moment because we have new technologies. So since we are talking about innovation, you have an eye on the future, and we have augmented reality, we have virtual reality, we have a gaming platform that really gives us the tool to engage with non-architectural audience, with communities and so on. And I think that it's a really exciting moment to change not only our discipline, architectural discipline, but also to change the way our academia can work and interact with other disciplines, but also with local communities.
Thank you. I think that those ambitions are great ones to have, and we share those in terms of being able to redefine what the design disciplines focus on, how we work on those goals, and to make our the relationship between kind of specialization and generalization far more crossing across a range of disciplines. We have a fourth question, which Pablo, you're going to address next, I believe.
Yeah.
It gets a little bit more deeper and specific to do with robotics across computation, interactivity, and fabrication.
Yes, thank you, Tom. The next question is the last one, actually. It's addressed to Natalie Gattegno, Robert Stuart Smith, and Nicolo D'Ambrosio. I hope that you're here with us still. And it's on the relation between robotic computational design, robotic interactivity, and robotic fabrication. So the context of this question is the following. Well, in the 1990s, and we were talking a little bit about it, architecture sort of opened up to an impossible world through a digital revolution. The 2000s, and it's something that we're discussing in the relationship to the post-digital, an exhibition by Greg Lynn at the CCA and Yale University. The 2000s sort of actualized this revolution through digital fabrication, and the critique was the relationship between highly abstract opening up issues to the consolidation and the making possible the impossible. Demarcating kind of at a certain point domesticating a certain radicality, if you want, or perhaps some other people see it the other way around, like opening up issues. Today, with robotic computation and fabrication, the relationship between computational design, including robotic autonomous agent-based design, robotic interactivity, and robotic fabrication, all informed since 2010 by big data, machine learning, and AI. One of the interesting questions is the relation between design and actualization, which it starts being non-linear, of course, right? There's no one or the other, but there is a flow, workflow of relationships that, to me, present what I denominated the architecture of information, where there's no real relationship or standardization of one or the other, but everything becomes kind of an open project. Can we discuss the relation between the possible, impossible, the utopian relationship between robotic autonomous computational design, robotic interactivity, and robotic fabrication? And the question here comes also to, you know, I heard the responses in the previous questions. There is the issue of prototyping, there is the issue of hacking, there is the issue of technology and culture, there is the issue of the regional and the global. But to me, one of the questions in this breaking of relation between design and actualization between the different types of robotics is what happens with the parameters? What happens with the ideology set by those parameters? And for instance, according to Badiou, if you enter a problem, hacking is already problematic because if you're hacking something, that means that you're reacting to something that already exists. And the question today, I would argue, with new emerging technologies, actually to move away from existing paradigms and opening up new paradigms. So the question goes back to the possible, impossible, and the relations between new emerging problems. There was also some discussion, and perhaps with this we round up, about social bias, spatial politics, and I think that in that sense, for instance, survey mechanisms, and that's why I mentioned surveys, one of the subjects that we're going to deal with in this program, is what is the relationship between social bias and the computational systems that we use? Can we invent different technologies to address them, and so on, right? The same, in a way, what we are seeing is disruption on the typical relation between past and present, because we're also thinking that new theories of architecture can be built upon previous architecture, right? So it's both back and forth, past and present, future, possible and impossible. I don't know if who wants to start addressing this question. Maybe Natalie or Robert Stewart Smith or Nicolo, yeah.
I can try to start. So many things loaded in that question, Pablo. My mind's racing. I think you raised so many important topics and things to consider. I mean, I think the context you provide of the 1990s and 2000s, I think fits quite well in the scope of architectural discourse and technology available to architects. But during the last 30 years, for instance, the construction of architecture has become, let's say, severely handicapped compared to the productivity in almost every other manufacturing sector. And it's similar when it comes to employment within, if you think of architecture not only as kind of a humanitarian and cultural endeavor that's occupied by people, but you also consider the impact and the ethics of the way we build it and how we build it, then there's a lot of questions that haven't really been answered in the 90s and 2000s that I think this decade's starting to try to address. I mean, for instance, the fact that, you know, we actually have a lack of housing in a lot of very developed countries, let alone in the developing world, and that construction isn't affordable, or the fact that more people die on construction sites than they do doing almost any other job in terms of, specifically in terms of manufacturing. So there's a lot of things that we just haven't got there yet, where we're not actually, I think, fulfilling maybe an ethical duty or a humanitarian duty, or even perhaps a cultural duty in providing an architecture that can kind of keep pace with the way the rest of society is developing and create an equally positive outcome that you see in many other fields. So I think we were all working on it, and it's a collective enterprise, but there's a lot to do. And I think a lot of the technologies that are emerging now help with that. For instance, autonomous technologies related with Industry 4 and autonomous manufacturing will enable for safer workplaces for construction, but they also allow for a more affordable yet bespoke architecture. So one that can address the diversity of people's needs in a kind of, I'd say, a much more user participatory way than perhaps in previous industrial revolutions or in previous architectural design domains. But I also think these technologies enable, so things like robotic fabrication, robotic construction, machine learning, a lot of these things, computer vision, they also allow for us to think of the mediums in which design operates to be expanded, where not only is the product of design engaging with more diverse media, but the way in which we design is somehow more unified with what we design. So for instance, it's possible to have situated and embodied or interactive architecture, or to have robots that are building things, designing through their active building. And as I said before, I think the most critical thing there is that we can think of an architecture that perhaps is more expressive or more diverse in expression, that engages in more media to create architectural design effects, but at the same time can also reduce the economic and environmental cost of building. So we are in an opportunity now, I think, to increase the aesthetic exploration of architecture while also improving architecture's impact on society and on individuals, and to do so in a way that is more tailored to individuality and the specific needs that were mentioned in some of the other conversations that are not the same everywhere on the planet. I mean, even if you talk about the geometry of an individual building site, every building site has a different site boundary and different conditions. And you know, once you start considering all the socioeconomic and cultural conditions that we deal with, we're really in need of this diverse response, but one that is also deeply creative and economically viable. So I think that's where we're heading. And I also think that autonomous technologies does not relieve authorship, but actually expands authorship into more mediums and in ways that are more user-centered and interactive.
Okay, great answer actually, because I mean, to me, it's all about design authorship, right? Like how are we able to increase that in relationship to people? I mean, and that's the challenge, I think, of our programs. How are we able to expand our situation in relationship to what's going on, and what are the relative capacity for us to engage to meta levels, right? And in that sense, to me, the design of media, right, is what is opening up these issues. And that's the way that I would like to see our program, that we are opening up new possibilities by focusing on the meta levels, on the algorithms, on the computational systems. Somebody was mentioning augmented reality. Yes, but the question is how are we aware of how we are designing and what is our relative role? And we can see that if we do not do that, right, and that's what's happening violently, we saw it in this pandemic, right? If we do not do that, I would argue that architects are going to simply disappear and we are going to be replaced by ways of doing architecture, right? Which is what has been called the architecture of information. And I think that we are, you know, somebody mentioned, okay, yes, we are here in this platform, this is architecture, yes, but I would argue it's the architecture of Zoom, right? And it's quite private, it's quite deterministic, right? So in that sense, what is, I mean, if you think about ideology, right, that becomes problematic. But I would like to know what Natalie or perhaps Nicolo think about this question.
I can step in. So this is Natalie. I think it's a super interesting conversation, and I do like that, you know, we're couching it in a certain kind of set of givens, right? That there are certain things that, you know, there's a discourse that we're recognizing that maybe needs to be kind of rethought and kind of reconsidered. I hear you on the kind of ways through which we can actually kind of determine new ways of authorship and new means of authorship. I think that's a kind of really interesting way of taking on these issues. I guess I'm hesitating just because I'm not to necessarily break rules again, but like to my concern is that we are maybe trying to take over one too many kind of pieces. So your question about like, can we design a computational system that can overcome social bias? Wouldn't that be amazing? But also, would it actually be complete? Like, is that like something that we would be kind of willing and compelling to kind of take on, or does it mean that we need to open up the field to bring in something else, right? So I think that's kind of, I think, belying your question about like, how do we set these parameters? Which parameters do we take on? Which parameters come to the surface, let's say, and which kind of recede? I think one of the things that I think is at the heart of a lot of the work that you guys have brought together here, and it's a kind of super interesting conversation, is that a lot of the frameworks that the projects that are kind of represented here, a lot of the frameworks are kind of open. They're kind of indeterminate. They have certain bits and pieces of them that haven't been quite figured out, parts that work, parts that don't work, parts that, you know, some of us have moved forward. So Jason and I, you know, the interest in kind of maybe interactivity, maybe the media piece. And in some ways those take a kind of prevalence. One of the things that I feel has been really, you know, maybe the effort for us to kind of be able to determine a lot of these elements and these parameters has maybe pushed aside the kind of notion of playfulness or unexpected, the improvisational kind of aspects, or the things that maybe we couldn't design and we couldn't prescribe and we couldn't kind of ingrain, but that maybe the way our audiences or people, occupants, wearers, whatever we want to call the kind of various audiences that this group is kind of responding to, can kind of take over and make their own. And I think that's one of the, going back to your question about authorship, I think it's also ownership, and who actually is able to kind of make some of these places and these territories their own. think one of the kind of fun things for Jason and myself is when people actually occupy the things and the objects that we build in, they occupy them in completely unexpected ways. They lie on the ground, they look at it from above, they live in the building across, they decide to like send their kids crawling through it, right? So there's like all of these, which mortifies us, but at the same time is awesome. So we kind of, we delight in that unexpectedness, and in some ways that's not something that we can kind of almost parametricize and ingrain, but I kind of almost, I want to be able to maintain some of that looseness in what we do, to be able to kind of, maybe that's a way to be able to kind of allow other people to read into it, other culture, other politics, other socials to kind of come into it from different angles.
No, I totally agree. And, when we mention, when I actually get in trouble usually with the word authorship, and I wrote extensively about it, I mean to open up possibilities, right? In the sense that you're talking about, and also in the Borges sense. I mean, Borges says that the reader is actually the most creative author of a text, right? So it goes back and forth between the design intention and the openness. But the question to me relative is how are we prescribing, or are we just designers? And that to me, the reason why we chose the people that we chose in this exhibition that are not only designers, they are trying to engage with computational systems, with robotic systems, and they're commenting on, they're opening up possibilities within those systems. That to me is a higher level, if you want, of action in a way. You guys with interactivity, right? What you're doing, you're inventing certain devices that perhaps are not available. And in that sense, what you talk about, the openness and the ownership of the user becomes much more alive when that is recognized, that there is an opening up of an opportunity and an opening up of a territory. I don't know if Nicolo from the IDC, you want to say anything before we jump into the open discussion, and perhaps we open up to our School of Architecture faculty, or anybody, we open up the discussion. But Nicolo, if you want to make a comment. Or maybe you're not here any longer. Nicolo D'Ambrosio, I think it is.
He's here, but Nico, we can't hear your voice.
Maybe you're muted.
Nico, can you hear us?
Sorry, I have my screen limited because of all the things.
Yes, he's trying. I can see him, but we can't hear you, Nico. Maybe make sure that in your setting, is this the microphone of your laptop?
There, yeah, no? You need to change the audio system. By default, it changes to the secondary. Change it back. We cannot hear you.
Can you?
Yeah. Yes, we can.
Okay.
Now, yes, perfect.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so first of all, I'd like to thank you for the invitation. It's really nice to be here and represent the work of ICD. Just to go back to address the question, I think it is probably interesting. The project that's actually on the exhibition here has one of the aspects that was the question was addressing, this idea of the robot continuously building in situ, and the idea of the structure that can somehow grow from some, according as a reply, as an answer to some inputs that it gets from the inhibition. So this is from the users, basically. This is what we explored around 4 years ago in the Elytra Filament Pavilion. And this is also what is somehow giving us the direction for the further expansion of this line of research of the Institute. So basically,
Nico, you're mute. You're mute again.
Again?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
So since when?
For maybe two sentences. Maybe can you repeat? Yeah.
Basically, one of the concepts that I was trying to explain was this idea of the robot that we presented here in the Elytra Filament Pavilion, that is building the components in situ and the structure that has the possibility to grow and expand in response of some input that it gets from the users. This was presented in this pavilion as an initial concept, but it also offered the cue to continue with the line of research that the Institute is currently pursuing, and is the idea of having general robots in the construction site that facilitate the construction. Basically, what we mostly do by using the robotic arms, these are the somehow preferred machines that we use in our project, since they are relatively versatile, quite simple and relatively versatile. And the idea that we are pursuing at the moment is the use of these machines and the computational methods that are behind them to increase the efficiency in constructions, which, as it was pointed out before, it's still one of the industries with lowest efficiency compared to other more common industries.
Thank you, Tom. You want to open up to the faculty?
We recognize that we have been going for almost about an hour and a half, but we do have a little bit of time left if there are questions from faculty, other guests, or students at NYIT. As a more open discussion, you can ask it generally, or maybe to anyone in particular specific.
Tom, is it also possible to react to some of the?
Yeah, we're giving maybe
some of the comments.
An opportunity for any faculty, staff, or just guests to this event. But please, Aaron, go ahead.
Well, I just one thought, because I think that it has been approached but never really said. So I think that one of the interesting question that I would ask today, in relation to the use of digital tools, especially in the field of manufacturing, is the notion of uncertainty. I think that, we have, if we look at traditional methods of fabrication, in the multiple communities and societies that are forming that field of construction, I think that always that notion of uncertainty always remained an important aspect. And my concern is very much about a certain positivist approach that sometimes we have toward digital technologies. So I would definitely challenge, notions of optimization or precision, as I hear often, in those kinds of forums. And I would actually, instead of that, ask, how do we deal, or how would you deal with that notion of uncertainty, of tolerance that is needed, not only from a technical point of view, but also, I would say, from a theoretical point of view. I think that would be very important. That notion of the unexpected is at the heart of our discipline of architecture. And the unexpected is very difficult to approach when it comes to the use of digital technologies, because, intrinsically, digital technologies is about mathematics, for instance. So how do you deal with that? I think that would be one of the challenges that I would, investigate within your new programs and those new laboratories.
No, I think it's a great comment, because it's exactly, at least from that point of view, what I'm interested in, to to think about opening up, I call it dimensions in a way. What you call uncertainty to me is opening up dimensions between drawing and building, for instance, or between the digital model and the build model, thinking that there are thresholds that one can expand continuously, all the way from the machine that produces that to the algorithm that actually defines the digital. So to me, the augmentation, I think Bernas was talking about augmenting and expanding. I think that is exactly one of the most interesting aspects of where we are today. And I'm excited about, you know, I think that we have to be critical about exactly what you're talking about as certainty. At the same time, I feel that we are in a very exciting moment because we are able to open up issues. And also, I have to say, you recently published a book that to me was very interesting about instabilities that we definitely recommend. That I think we were touching upon those issues, right? Like what happens when an AI system recognizes that something is happening that is not expected in the digital design, right? In the digital process, or how do you deviate or open up questions, material questions, once the material reacts and was not an anticipated reaction, right? And what happens, you recalibrate, you don't, you go back and forth. That's why we were talking about nonlinear relationships between computational design, robotics, and material, right? But perhaps we can open up so that Pablo, we have other people. Yeah.
Just to open up to everybody, I think that that notion of uncertainty is something that I can definitely recognize in some of the works that are presented in the exhibition, because some of those works are related to the notion of the affective, or they addressing that dimension, the affective dimension of the object. I can see that in the work of Anouk and Nicolo, in the work of Benaz. And I think that it is very important that, you know, that maybe that notion of uncertainty is also, related to that relation that the human has with the machine and with the object. And so that very unstable relation is also part of the experiment.
If I can just jump really quickly in the conversation, I think that three other terms and words are really interesting in this moment. One is misunderstanding, the other is appropriation, and misuse as well. In the moment you start using a program, you write an algorithm, you use artificial intelligence, one of the things that we can do it, and that we have been always doing as architects, using in the wrong way. So to actually search for mistake, for gaps, for errors, and it is in a way to use creatively all kinds of technology and to see what we can create. So as architects, we have this part of creativity, and we have been always using it since ever. But I'm now think about, you know, the beginning when we all started using Maya and simulation software, and actually we didn't really understand how they were working, and while we were using it in the wrong way, we were creating new shapes, new aesthetics, new processes, and so on. And the same thing we can keep doing it now with using artificial intelligence in the wrong way. And at the same time, the misunderstanding is part of the process while working again in a multidisciplinary way, because we very often, when at least in my experience, when I've been working with professionals of other disciplines, especially in I don't know, in healthcare or automotive design, for example, we use the same word, but we mean different actually thing. And this is really interesting, because in the moment you start misunderstanding each other, you actually create an interesting tension that is really creative, and it actually can open your mind to completely new visions and ideas.
I wanna follow that up with a few things. I love to think about how Aaron started sort of criticizing in a way the use of computation just merely for the use for optimization or efficiency, which is like, you can also question, but what is left out? Like, is the promise of like use of computational technology is just to make objects to become more optimized or more efficient, and for whom are we even discussing here? And I think it's very important to then start thinking about ways that these computational technologies can allow us to interface with things which are more subtle, like affect. And I think affective computing is the discipline that is growing really fast. And I think the potential of using sensory technologies and robotic fabrication should really move also to sort of explore this discipline, because there is so much information about users that it's not easily about like, oh, is this object ergonomic enough, or is this efficient enough in terms of material use? But there is so much other criteria for evaluation that we have dismissed in the discourse. The other thing that I think Nicola mentioned, which I really enjoyed, like in terms of this sort of unexpected, I guess maybe you mentioned it in your previous comment, but like leaving sort of, and I think to some extent Natalie was also mentioning, leaving this space for unexpectedness or sort of improvisation that can happen. So in other words, the use of interaction design can allow the room for this sort of events that happen in the space, that it's out of the designer who typically or traditionally operated as a genius designer or architect to define everything, and leave room for events that we are not even aware in the first place. And I think if we explore that interaction, if we explore that what possibilities are out there through that interaction with the built environments, with the design of objects, wearables, products, then we can really tap into the potential of computational design, I would say.
Well, in that sense, to me, I just briefly want to touch upon what it means to be critical in computation, which I think is an aspect that at least very few people try to touch upon, because, and this is a conversation that we had with Patrick Schumacher back at Cooper Union, I think it was 2017, in which we were criticizing exactly that, the problem of optimization and linear relationship between setting up a problem and just linearly exploring how that would continue. And I was giving the example of Le Corbusier functionalism, right? In which you sit on the Corbusier chaise longue, and perhaps the first minute is comfortable, but when you realize that the chair is actually indexing your own body, you start feeling very uncomfortable, right? And it's when the oppressiveness of the calculation of that, of functionalism becomes an issue in itself. And I think that because we are in the, we are beyond the Second World War, we passed through many post-structuralist issues. I think that the issue here is not to go back to the same problems that the modern movement went through, or the same problems that the Renaissance went through. I think we're talking about the new Renaissance and so on. And I think that there is opportunity here to think computation as a critical project, no longer as a problem of linear optimization and functionalist optimization, but thinking about how can we raise different type of questions. How can we, for instance, to me, there is a linear, when Nicola, it slightly disagree about the misuse, because the misuse means that you are still playing within the ranges of possibilities of a system. And the question here is to pair architecture as a system of thinking with computation as a thinking, also as a system of thinking, and see how can we break through the typologies that computation projects into architecture. And I think that there is a lot of work to be done there. And I think that that's why it's an exciting time. But perhaps, Tom, we need to see if anybody is there jumping in from, apart from the participants. I don't know if I cannot see the chat, so I'm not sure if somebody's
Pablo,
raising their hand.
I would like to make a comment, please.
Yes, yes.
Well, first of all, I want to thank all the panelists, and the discussion is absolutely exciting just to listen the different perspectives and positions, and the conversation is really, really, really inspiring to me. But I want to welcome Alessandro Mellis. I saw that he's actually one of the participants in this conversation tonight. And because Alessandro, besides being the curator of the Padiglione Italia at the Biennale of Venezia, is also our new endowed chair for overseeing those two, particularly those two MS programs. And I also would like to give you a little bit a background how I conceived those programs, because some of the comments actually were absolutely on point and were so much referring to the process of conceiving those two programs from the real beginning. And when I wrote the proposal for the IDC Foundation, actually Pablo and Tom, you were not even here, I believe, right? Because it was about 2 years ago. So I exactly conceived those two programs together. They're not two separate entities. They are not two separate trajectories. They are not two visions that are running on parallel tracks. They are overlapping, they are intersecting. Actually, when I was conceiving the health and design program, was all but healthcare, was not at all about healthcare. And I was exactly thinking about computational technologies as part of it. And the same when, you know, I was discussing with you, Pablo, the computational technologies program, we were actually going into health and wellness and the idea of the many ways of health can be actually relating to architecture. So we are investing on those two programs because they are part of what we are thinking will be the future of our school. I strongly believe that through experimentation and research, through the agenda of those two programs, we will push the boundaries of what we are exploring in our school, and we'll set the ground for new territories of explorations. And tonight, I want to thank you all for giving us so many ideas and discussion points that we for sure will revisit during, you know, the time that we will have those two programs available. And I want to invite many of you, if not all of you, to be part of the conversation when we will run the program with our students and keep the dialogue fruitful and going on. I think it's very important to stimulate ideas through conversations like tonight. So thank you, Tom. Thank you, Pablo. And thank you, all of you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Maria.
Yeah.
Yes, great. So I don't know if anybody wants to have a final comment from the audience. Tom, you were saying that the faculty of School of Architecture, is somebody raising a question or not? Sure.
I don't think we have any questions yet. Those sounded a bit like concluding comments.
Yes.
If anybody does have any.
Didn't mean that way.
No, I think it's actually, maybe we should cut it here because I thought that that was great, Maria. You know, the relationship between the two programs that some of the participants were touching upon. So perhaps that was a perfect conclusion for this evening. And also, yes, welcoming Alessandro, which at the last moment we grabbed him. So I think he's there still. So.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Pablo. Thank you very much, Maria, Tom. Very happy and very excited, by the way.
We are looking forward to have you here.
If they allow me to come, you know.
We will try very hard.
If the president.
By the way, you can see how ambitious Maria is, because the level of the faculties, I would argue, is quite impressive. It's beyond the limits. We have people from all over the world. So it's
Let's say
amazing.
we are courageous.
Yes.
And I really love that. I have fun in really, you know, bringing together people that can have something different to say, or it doesn't have to be always in agreement with each other, right? We are in conversation sometime on different positions, but nurturing the discourse on something that we don't even know actually where those programs will bring us. and opening up opportunities for our students with careers that maybe they don't even imagine right now, right? So the learning experiences that we are offering right now, yes, is about uncertainty. I agree with that. But that's the beauty of it. I think, you know, so I'm fortunate actually to have the possibility to host conversations like this. I'm really grateful to all of you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
All right. So maybe Tom, yes.
Well, that once again does sound like some concluding comments.